Hi, I'm Jeremy Saunders and welcome to my citrixconverge 2021 session. Last year at citrixconverge, I introduced my free self-service session reset tool to the community. It empowers users to clear their own sessions or recover them by terminating rogue processes. This reduces the burden on the service desk and allows users to get themselves up and running in the shortest possible time. Let's get cracking. This year, I want to talk about the Citrix self-service session reset tool 12 months on, or how feedback, experience, and lessons learned have driven new features and security enhancements. If you haven't seen the tool yet, this is what it looks like. It's got a drop-down box for the users to select a site if you've got multiple sites, and it's got a list of actions that they can take on their sessions. The agenda for today will be to talk about the technical learnings and gotchas, the usage learnings, and the gaps in the documentation and communications that I found I needed to plug in order to help provide a better service, not only for the users, but for the community. Self-service, baby. Download the tool, baby. So the first technical learning I had was I had a lot of feedback from people to say, can we disable some of these features? They don't want users to be able to get and terminate processes. They might not want users to be able to forcefully restart machines, etc. So what I did was I enhanced the web.config file with a list of their string settings within the web.config, but they're actually converted to Boolean settings in the code. And these are either set to true or false. And they will turn on and off these sessions, including the instructions actually, so we can have a very minimized web interface that the users can access. And that covers all the use cases so far that people have sent to me that they want to be able to implement this tool for. By default, I leave on all the features that you see here, and there are a couple of other features that are turned off by default. I have a feature there that will bypass the criteria for hidden session checks. As you can see here, there are criteria that we set, which basically only allow the user to hide under certain circumstances. One particular use case or one particular request I had was to allow them to hide their sessions under all circumstances, and then in fact to enable an unhide button, which will appear down here. That was really not within the scope of the tool, but I felt that their use case was valid, and therefore I enhanced the code for that, but didn't set that as the default settings. Self-service, baby. Download the tool, baby. Another enhancement I made, which I knew from the start was going to be an issue, was to enhance the security around the terminate processes method. By default, initially, all you needed to do was send a remote host and a process ID to the function, and it would attempt to terminate the process. Now what I do is I also pass the username through, even though the user has used the get processes method to get a list of their processes, so therefore they're their processes. What I felt was the security risk was that if you're addressing this tool from PowerShell, from Python, from other from other methods rather than using the web interface that I provide, and therefore someone could terminate someone else's process very easily. So what I now do is, as I pass the username through that is actually using the tool, I then compare that against the process owner. It does a comparison here, and then it only proceeds to attempt to terminate their process if they are the owner of that process, and that secures that process, or that function, I should say, or method. Self-service, baby. Download the tool, baby. Now, when I first developed this tool, I developed it for integration with Citrix, the Citrix Studio commandlets. So therefore, it just worked automatically because simply the commandlets work from 32-bit to 64-bit, and I didn't really think about that. However, when using the CVAD or XenApp, XenDesktop Remote PowerShell SDK or the Citrix Cloud Connector, only the 64-bit ones work, with the 32-bit ones giving an unhelpful error. And this made it really challenging to troubleshoot. But to give you some background, by default, a Visual Studio project will actually default to 32-bit. So that caught me out because I didn't think about that in the development. So for example, the output from the 32-bit and 64-bit PowerShell commands will be identical when using Citrix Studio integration. So you've got the output there. Sorry, you've got the commands here with the output, which I haven't provided in the screenshot, but just to give you an idea. And you've got the output here running from the 32-bit PowerShell command line. Not a problem at all. However, when doing that from the CVAD or XenApp XenDesktop Remote PowerShell SDK or the Citrix Card Connector, the output for the 32-bit version is bizarre. So if you're running the 32-bit version of PowerShell, and I have already authenticated here, I've just removed that bit of the screenshot just so that I'm not taking up too much of the screen here. You can see that the output here of the get broker session commandlet, for example, is invalid admin server version 0 should be 2. And that threw me for at least 2 weeks because I didn't know what that meant, and I was really struggling to get to the bottom of that. And then it also throws that there's a syntax error, and I thought, how is this even a syntax error? I'm running the command correctly. What's happening? Have Citrix changed something in the commandlets? No, I did some testing and I found that they haven't. So it was really throwing me. And then I found a solitary Citrix forum post that mentioned he had a similar issue, and he posted his solution, which talked about changing the project in Visual Studio to 64-bit, and bingo, that worked. But I really think that Citrix, why couldn't they simply say that this operation is not supported on 32-bit PowerShell or something along those lines? That would have helped me from the start and really triggered the fix and saved me 2 weeks of work. However, I learned a lot out of the process. So whilst I was frustrated and annoyed with Citrix at the time, I felt that the learning was far better than the frustration. So basically in Visual Studio, all you do in your build is you change the platform target to x64 when it defaults to any CPU, and it will default to 32-bit by default when running on a 64-bit machine. Self-service, baby. Download the tool, baby. Another gotcha, and it seemed obvious afterwards, was that the authentication using the set XD credentials, get XD authentication, and get XD credential commandlets must be invoked in the same PowerShell run space as you want to use them, such as when you want to use the get broker session, for example. If you run them in a different run space, the authentication fails with an XD SDK proxy not set error message, and that also threw me for a while. And running it from PowerShell, as an example, purely from PowerShell, you can see the error here. So basically what I did to fix the code, well, I wrote a second method on the left here. It's quite a long method, and it's not all in the screenshot, but I wrote a long method here to do the XDAuth, so they run those commandlets within this method. And it now receives the site name and the run space. It uses the site name to get the profile type, customer ID, client ID, and client secret from the Citrix sites.xml file for that site. If you go over to the right, you'll see this is the original method I wrote to get current Citrix sessions for the user. What it does is it sets up the run space. And then what it did was it continued on to invoke the get broker session commandlet. However, what I do in the middle of that is I send it off to the XDAuth method, but I also pass it the run space. So we're basically, and it's receiving the run space, and it's using this run space to run those other commandlets in. And therefore, we're doing the auth within the same run space as the get broker session commandlet in this case, and that's how it works. Seems obvious in the after you've achieved what you've needed to achieve, and after the pennies dropped. But as you're coding, you're thinking, why aren't these commandlets working? Why aren't I able to auth in a separate run space? Self-service, baby. Download the tool, baby. My next learning was about processing Ajax synchronously because, of course, Ajax stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Using an Ajax call with async set to false is not only deprecated, it's just a really bad practice and you shouldn't use it. And in fact, using Chrome and Edge and other browsers in debug mode will actually flag this as being bad and something that's deprecated and something that you shouldn't use. What I didn't want to do was I didn't want people to message me and say that, my code is crap or I'm not doing my code right. So I worked on flows on how I can make the code flow well, but also it receives all the stuff it needs to, all the data from the API calls it makes, and is able to flow the web interface nicely for the users. And of course, we want to put a hold on that initial load of the document because we want to be able to get all the app settings from the web.config file and be able to set them as variables within the interface. So I wanted a way of being able to flow that code and stop it, but also still using the API calls. Therefore, to overcome this, I actually learned about the JavaScript Fetch API with an async await syntax. And with that, in conjunction with the jQuery hold ready function, I was able to hold the document ready until the app settings and initial variables were set. And this worked really, really well and provided the exact outcome I needed for full browser support across all browsers. The way I did this, and this is a screenshot of the code within the index.html file, is it basically processes. This is the function up here, so it processes this first. So it puts a hold ready, and therefore locks the loading of the document ready. It then calls the get_app settings function, which is here. This get_app settings function is a fetch async await, and it makes a call to the CTX session get app settings API. So it gets all the API, all the settings from the web.config file, essentially. It passes them back and it then processes them all. And it takes they're similar to a key pair, and it takes the key as the variable name and the value as its actual setting, true or false. So it's able to process that up here. And then we make a couple of other calls, which I was having some initial issues with asynchronously. So we get the logged on username, we get the display name, and we get the sites list. And then we remove that lock from the ready function. And then we continue to, then it loads the document ready and continues on. And that I found gave us the correct order and the correct process that enabled it to give the users a consistent experience and make sure those variables are consistently read every time. And therefore, features that you turn on and off will just work instantly without an issue in the web interface. Self-service, baby. Download the tool, baby. Onto the usage learnings. I found 2 extra power states that were causing some issues for users. Very rare, but it still happened, and I really wanted to eliminate these from being a problem for them. So sometimes we saw machines getting stuck in a turning off power state. Whilst this was rare, it did happen for us a few times, especially with the VDAs from 7.15, CU4, CU5, and also maybe it was also related to XenTools 7.x. Wasn't too sure. The logs were clean, so I wasn't really sure, and I didn't spend a lot of time triaging it. But what I wanted to do was eliminate this from being a problem for users. Also, with the upgrade to Citrix Hypervisor 8.2, we found that occasionally a machine might end up in a suspended power state. Maybe we have an unhealthy Citrix Hypervisor. So therefore, I wanted to make sure that users could hide those sessions too very easily. So I added those two to the criteria that allows users to be able to hide stuck sessions. And in the backend code, I also check for that session state, which gives them the ability to hide those sessions. Self-service, baby. Download the tool, baby. And even then, users were still logging incidents. And from Studio or Director, when we were triaging, we found that sometimes a log off or a restart would just not work, but a forceful restart would. It's obviously just the nature of Windows and the apps and the VDAs and the apps may have crashed and maybe caused exhaustion of resources, and we really we are left with no choice but to forcefully restart it. So I added the feature for users and documented it in a fashion so that they could try a forceful reboot as a last resort, as it's not something you really want them to do all the time. So the way I did that in the instructions is I made sure it flowed as the last on the last line. So please try a log off first. If that doesn't work, please try a graceful restart, which is the restart machines button. And if that doesn't work, then try the forceful restart. And I just give them a bit of text here to tell them it could take up to 5 minutes before the Citrix workspace app or Citrix receiver allows you to be able to reconnect to a new session just over the way that works, just so that they wouldn't log further calls to say, I can't relaunch again. Self-service, baby. Download the tool, baby. And of course, the most powerful thing is user training, which will avoid misuse, bad water cooler advice, and bad habits. What we found was, if you look in the logs that the tool creates, people were just going in and terminating all their processes, which of course logs off their session anyway. So, we would talk to those users and just say, hey, just click the log off button, that will do the job. If you then have problems because a specific app won't terminate properly, then use the terminate sessions for that process only, but do the log off properly. So it's a nice graceful log off. And therefore there's no possible corruption with profile data. But really we've done a lot of training. We've done Yammer posts internally. We've done WebEx sessions with users. Every time a user logs an incident where we feel that their session could be addressed, their issues could be addressed by using the tool, we make sure we point them to this tool and say, hey, use this tool first, and then let me know if that doesn't work, and then we can help triage the issue further. But really it's about making sure that they use this as their first port of call. And that in itself has saved us thousands and thousands of service desk calls over the last 12 plus months that this tool's been in production in the environment where I work in. Self-service, baby. Download the tool, baby. A learning from the technical community was that, you realize that not everyone knows how to use GitHub properly. So they go to the site and they download the source code. And they install that source code, and of course they get errors because it's not designed to work that way. They get all these .NET errors, and then they send me emails to say your tool doesn't work. And I look into those errors and I just Google those errors, and I realize exactly what they've done straight away. So I just let them know to download the release and install that instead, and then presto, it works. But really I tried to improve the documentation just to tell them to download the latest compiled release to the right hand side. And that way, hopefully, since I've done that, I really haven't had anyone download the source directly and install that, which has been good. And it's just about improving your documentation and learning from that. Self-service, baby. Download the tool, baby. Another learning I had from the technical community was about licensing the project. Some people are reluctant to download and deploy it in production in an environment. Simply because of the licensing ramifications around that. Their legal team needs to see it. Maybe their onboarding process for software needs to be able to view and verify the license that it's legal and that it can be used without ramifications for them. So what I did was I found that the GPL3 license was the most applicable for what I wanted at this point in time. But if you read the licensing rules around GitHub, they also advise that putting further notes in the README around how you intend it to be used is advisable. So what I did was I made sure that I stated clearly that it was free for commercial use. And I made sure that also I stated that it could not be used for revenue generating activities, more so from another consultant taking the code and selling it off as theirs. That I didn't want to happen. And I wanted to retain the rights to the source code for the time being anyway, until I've finish the code to a certain level, and then I might release it so that other people can contribute to the code. Self-service, baby. Download the tool, baby. And the other learning, of course, is that people never read your blog or your articles or your documentation the way you intend for them to read it. Everyone has a different take. So therefore you get lots of questions, or people misunderstand the use of the tool in this case. So I found that really difficult to deal with initially. I thought, well, why can't you read this? Why can't you see what I'm trying to tell you? But then, you've got to take a step back and understand the fact that they have misread it means that you haven't clearly identified that you haven't clearly written the documentation in a way that they are reading it. So therefore, you've got to be prepared to continually reword and rework your documentation to remove all those inconsistencies and misinterpretations from the tool or from its intended use. All right, stop that user frustration. Get this tool and do the implementation. It's going to be a game changer. It will eliminate the directed user anger. The best way to gain their trust is to deploy this tool. It's a must. Self-service, baby. Download the tool, baby. That's a wrap. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to my session. Really, my key takeaway, and really something that I tell everyone, is that you don't need to be a developer with advanced levels of skills and programming knowledge to build cool projects like this. You just need to have a vision and be prepared to learn. I love coding. Coding is fun, and I believe that anyone can do it. Please read my blog on this tool. Connect to me on LinkedIn and connect to me on Twitter, and please feel free to ask me any questions you like. Thank you.